"Mister, would you be my dad?" The words hit Thomas Carter like a gust of wind on a still morning, unexpected, disarming, and oddly warm. He stood frozen in front of a folding table stacked with apple pies and buttermilk biscuits, a half-full basket of sage and rosemary in one hand, and a bag of seed packets in the other. Around him, the weekend farmer's market buzzed with chatter and shuffling boots, the scent of fried catfish and fresh cornbread thick in the air. But in that moment, it all vanished. All he could see was the small girl with wild curls poking out from under a faded purple hoodie, staring up at him with eyes too solemn for a child so young. She couldn't have been more than 6, but her words didn't carry the softness of a child's game. They were deliberate, shaped by longing. Her small hands gripped the edge of the pie table as if anchoring herself to something solid. For a long second, Thomas didn't say a word. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. The girl didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, waiting. I'm sorry. What did you say?" he finally asked, crouching slightly to meet her eyes. She didn't blink. "I said, would you be my dad?" Thomas's chest tightened, and not just from surprise. It had been years since anyone looked at him that directly. Years since someone asked something of him that wasn't tied to bills or broken equipment. He glanced around, expecting someone to rush in, maybe her mother, maybe a vendor who knew the family. But no one came. "I don't think I'm the right man for that job," he murmured, standing back up. She pursed her lips like she'd heard that line before. Then, with a small frown, she reached into the pocket of her oversized hoodie and pulled out a lumpy brown paper napkin folded carefully in half. She held it up. Inside was a homemade cookies, lightly misshapen, but neatly wrapped. The smell of cinnamon and nutmeg drifted up to Thomas's nose. There was a shaky line of icing along the edge that read, in painstakingly crooked letters, "Thank you. My mom says cookies can fix most things," the girl said. "This one's for you." Thomas blinked, caught between a laugh and a breath he couldn't release. "What's your name?" "Maya," she said. "Maya William. My mom's the one who sells the peach cobbler at the end of the row." He looked down the line of vendor tents and spotted her tall, slender, wrapped in a denim apron dusted with flour, arranging loaves of cornbread with practiced care. Elise, if he remembered right. He'd bought her banana nut muffins once or twice. Never spoke more than a polite morning. Maya followed his gaze. "She doesn't know I asked. She thinks dads just leave, but I don't think all of them do." Thomas's throat tightened again, but this time with something he didn't want to name. "Maya," he said gently, "I don't think your mom would want." "She never says what she wants," the girl cut in. "She just works and works. And sometimes, I think she's forgetting how to smile." Thomas didn't have a response, not because he disagreed, but because he understood. Too well. Maya shrugged and took a step back, leaving the cookie in his hand. "It's okay. You don't have to decide now. But I saw you help that man last week, the one who fell with the milk crate. You didn't even say anything. You just helped. That's why I picked you." She turned and walked away before he could answer. Her tiny sneakers made soft thuds on the grass as she disappeared down the row of vendors. Something heavier still lingered. Simple cookie, a smudged "thank you," and a question that refused to leave his chest. If this story touched a hidden corner of your heart, tap the like button and share where you're listening from. Leave a comment below. Thomas looked down at the cookie again. The icing had smudged from the warmth of his palm, but the message still clung to the paper. "Thank you." He hadn't heard that in a long time. He looked toward the peach cobbler table. Elise was laughing with a customer, brushing flour off her apron, eyes squinting in the sun, but the laugh didn't quite reach her shoulders. There was a stiffness there, a heaviness that no baked good could mask. Thomas sighed and placed the cookie in the inside pocket of his worn flannel jacket, next to where he used to keep his wedding ring. Maybe it was just a cookie, or maybe it was an invitation. Either way, it was the first time in years that something had stirred behind the quiet walls he'd built, and he wasn't sure whether that scared him or made him want to come back next Saturday. The following Saturday came with a soft drizzle and the earthy scent of rain-soaked wood. Vendors were still setting up when Thomas Carter pulled his beat-up Chevy truck into the gravel lot behind the farmer's market. The windshield wipers squeaked in protest, and for a moment, he sat in silence, gripping the steering wheel as if it might tell him whether he was making a mistake. He hadn't planned to come back. He'd told himself it was too much, too soon, too strange. He didn't need attachments, didn't want them. But that little girl's voice, so small, so sure, kept threading through his thoughts like a melody he couldn't shake. And then there was the cookie. He hadn't eaten it. Instead, he'd placed it on the narrow windowsill above his kitchen sink. It sat there all week, slightly hardening, still smelling of cinnamon, a message etched in icing that hadn't faded. Thank you. Thomas pulled his coat tighter and stepped out into the misty morning. The market was quieter this early, the usual bustle subdued by the weather. He made his way toward the row of food vendors, nodding politely at a man unloading crates of collard greens. His boots squished softly against the wet grass as he approached Elise Williams' stand. She was already there, her back to him, adjusting a stack of honey cornbread loaves, apron snug at her waist. Her hair was tied in a loose scarf, and a thermos of something warm steamed beside a tray of muffins. Maya wasn't in sight. "Morning," he said, his voice low but clear. Elise turned, startled at first, but then relaxed. A cautious smile flickered across her lips. "Well, morning. You're back." "Yeah, thought I'd try the peach cobbler this time. Everyone talks about it like it's the second coming." She chuckled softly and grabbed a paper container. "That's a bold claim. I'd argue the banana bread could give it a run for its money." Thomas watched her movement, steady, efficient, practiced. "You're here every weekend?" "Every Saturday, rain or shine. Gotta pay the rent somehow," she replied, handing him the box. "You came all this way just for cobbler?" He opened his mouth, paused, then shrugged. Something like that. Before she could reply, a familiar voice piped up behind him. "I told you he'd come back." Thomas turned to see Maya standing just a few steps away, arms crossed, eyes twinkling with victory. She wore a raincoat this time, still oversized, but buttoned properly, and clutched a sketchbook under one arm. "Maya," Elise warned gently, "we talked about this. I didn't say anything this time," Maya said quickly, wide-eyed. "I just said I had a feeling." Thomas smiled faintly and crouched beside her. "You keeping your mom in check?" "I try," she whispered, leaning in slightly, "but she's stubborn, like cornbread left in the oven too long." That pulled a laugh from Elise, a real one this time, and Thomas saw a flicker of something loosen in her shoulders. He stood and handed her a couple of bills. "I'll take the cobbler, and maybe a couple muffins for the road." As Elise wrapped the goods, Maya fidgeted beside him, then suddenly blurted out, "Did you like the cookie?" Thomas looked at her and nodded slowly. "I didn't eat it." Her face fell. "But I kept it," he added. "It's on my kitchen window. Still smells like cinnamon." Maya brightened. "That means you're thinking about us." Elise handed over the bag, her expression unreadable now. "Maya." "It's all right," Thomas said, taking the bag. "She's got good instincts." The conversation hung in the air a moment longer than it should have. Elise looked at him, really looked, and then gave a small nod. "Listen," she said, her tone quieter now. "I appreciate you being kind to her. She's been through a lot, and she doesn't always understand that people come and go." "I'm not trying to confuse her," Thomas replied honestly. "Truth is, I don't know what I'm doing. I didn't come here looking for anything. I was just buying rosemary. And now you've got muffins and a life proposition," Elise said with a dry smile. He returned it. "Something like that." A gust of wind swept through the market, rattling tents and lifting corners of tablecloths. Elise reached to steady a tray. Thomas instinctively helped her, pressing down the plastic cover. "Thanks," she said, her hands brushing his. For a moment, neither of them moved. "I have a front porch that needs restaining," he said suddenly. "Thought I'd do it next week before the real cold comes in." Elise raised an eyebrow. "That so?" "Yeah. It's a 2-person job." He paused. "Or maybe a 3-person one if someone small wants to supervise." Maya's gasp of excitement was enough to draw stares from nearby booths. "I'll bring my paintbrush," she shouted. Elise laughed, shaking her head. "Lord help me." Thomas took a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "I'm not saying anything has to change," he said. "Just maybe let me help. Carry some of the weight." Elise didn't respond right away, but she didn't say no either. As Thomas turned to leave, Maya ran ahead, skipping on the wet grass. She twirled once, arms wide, before spinning back toward him. "You came back," she whispered, like it was the most important truth in the world. Thomas looked down at the cobbler in his hand, then at the mother and daughter framed by flower and early morning mist. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." The following Tuesday, the sun emerged from behind a curtain of gray, scattering warm light over the low hills of northern Vermont. Thomas stood on his weather-worn porch with a can of faded barn red stain in one hand and a brush in the other. He glanced toward the long gravel driveway, half expecting the invitation to have been politely forgotten. But at 9:03 a.m., a dusty blue Subaru pulled into the clearing. Elise stepped out first, hair pulled into a loose ponytail, wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and guarded uncertainty. Maya followed close behind, bounding toward the porch with a small, well-worn brush clutched in her tiny hand. "I told you we'd come," she announced, holding the brush up like a trophy. Thomas chuckled and gestured toward the porch steps. "You're right on time. Got the whole crew here." "I'm the foreman," Maya said seriously. "Mom says I supervise better than I clean." Elise gave a sheepish smile as she climbed the steps. "She's not wrong." Thomas offered her a thermos. "Coffee. Just made it. Black or with cream?" "Black," she said, taking it. "Thanks." They stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch, comfortable but cautious. The house was small, built decades ago by Thomas's grandfather, paint peeling, railings slightly crooked, but still standing strong against wind and time. Maya knelt beside the railing and began brushing it with intense focus. "I'm making it look new," she whispered, "so people won't think it's lonely." Thomas turned to Elise. "You all right with this?" Elise exhaled slowly, her hands wrapped around the thermos. "Truthfully, I don't know. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. But then she looks at you like you're already a part of her life, like she trusts you more than I can explain." Thomas nodded. "She's got that effect on people." They began working side by side. Elise handled the top posts, Thomas tackled the base, and Maya darted between them, occasionally pausing to correct their form. "You missed a spot," she told Thomas, pointing to a rough patch of wood. "That so?" he muttered. "Looks like I need a quality control supervisor." "Exactly," she beamed. Hours passed. Birds chirped in the distance, and a breeze carried the scent of drying leaves and old pine. By lunchtime, the porch was halfway done, and the three of them sat on the steps with sandwiches Thomas had turkey on rye, with homemade pickles and sweet tea on the side. Elise took a bite and raised her eyebrows. "These pickles are dangerously good." "Family recipe," Thomas said. "My grandmother's. She used to say vinegar fixed more than food." "She sounds wise." She was. Tough, too. Carried a shotgun when squirrels got too bold in the garden. Elise laughed, the sound light and free. Maya laid her head on her mother's shoulder, chewing quietly. Thomas studied them. They looked like they belonged there, like that porch had been waiting for their weight to press down on it again. But he also knew better than to assume permanence from a few quiet hours. Later that afternoon, after Elise finished rinsing their brushes at the outdoor spigot and Maya napped on an old quilt in the grass, Elise wandered toward the back garden, where rows of rosemary and lavender stood in gentle disarray. "You did all this yourself?" she asked. Thomas nodded, pulling off his gloves. "Most of it. Took years. Lost a lot to frost and deer, but you learn as you go." "It's beautiful," she said. "Not perfect, but beautiful." He glanced at her, sensing more behind her words. "That's supposed to be a metaphor?" She shrugged, but her smile didn't fade. "Maybe." They stood in silence, watching the wind rustle through the mint bushes. Thomas hesitated, then asked, "You ever think about leaving this place, moving somewhere easier?" "Every month. But I don't." "Why not?" She stared at a patch of marigolds near the fence. "Because every time I think about it, Maya finds something here to love. A tree. A neighbor's dog. You." Thomas's breath caught slightly. "Me?" Elise turned to him, not backing down. "She's not subtle. She picks her people fast, and when she does, it's for good. I'm just scared she's wrong this time." "I understand," he said quietly. "You're protecting her." "I'm protecting us both," she corrected. "You seem kind, Thomas. Solid. But you're still a stranger. A good one, maybe. But I don't let good intentions raise my daughter." He nodded slowly. "You shouldn't. She deserves more than good intentions." They stood there a while longer, neither willing to push nor retreat, The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the yard. Eventually, Elise moved to gather their things. Maya was still dozing when she lifted her gently into her arms. "She's getting heavy," Elise whispered with a smile. "Need help?" "Number, I've carried her this long. I can handle a little more." Thomas opened the truck door for her. As Elise buckled Maya into the seat, she glanced back at him. "Thanks for letting us be here today." He nodded. "You're welcome anytime." She lingered a second longer, then climbed in and started the engine. The truck rolled away slowly, dust lifting behind it. Thomas stood on the newly stained porch, watching until the vehicle disappeared into the trees. The brush still lay on the step where Maya had dropped it. He picked it up, set it gently on the windowsill beside the now hardened cookie, and whispered to no one, "I don't know what this is, but I'd like it to keep going." The fall deepened in quiet ripples across the Vermont hills. Leaves blushed into gold. The mornings crisped into mist, and the farmer's market filled with the scent of pumpkin spice and baked apples. It had been nearly a month since the porch painting day, and in that time, Thomas had found himself orbiting closer and closer to the life of Elise and Maya William. They didn't move in officially, but their presence had settled into his days like well-worn boots by the back door. On Thursdays, Elise began leaving extra loaves of molasses bread wrapped in tea towels on his porch. On Sundays, Maya would show up with chalk drawings on index cards, leaving them wedged into the slats of his mailbox. Every time he saw the swirled colors or crooked hearts drawn in crayon, something in him softened that hadn't softened in years. That morning, Thomas stood at the back of the market with a flat of rosemary pots, preparing to donate them to the church fundraiser. The sky was overcast, but the air was warm enough that folks lingered longer at each booth. He spotted Elise just as she was setting up her folding table. She wore a soft brown sweater, and her cheeks were flushed from the brisk wind. Maya was with her, balancing a basket of pumpkin muffins as if it were a crown. "Elise!" shouted a familiar voice from across the walkway. A woman in her 60s, with a wide-brimmed hat and silver braids, hurried over. "Good morning, Miss Ruthie," Elise said warmly, setting down a tray. "You need more apple turnovers?" "Girl, I need more than that, but I'll start there." Ruthie laughed. Then she glanced sideways at Thomas, her grin shifting slightly. "You're the one she keeps pretending not to talk about, aren't you?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Am I?" Ruthie hummed. "You're not fooling anybody, Sugar." Maya leaned over her basket and stage whispered. She called him Sugar. Elise looked mortified. "Miss Ruthie, you know how to cause trouble before noon." Ruthie laughed again and walked off with her pastries, waving dramatically over her shoulder. Thomas stepped closer to the table, offering Maya a small sprig of mint from his pocket. "That's for your lemonade experiments." Maya squealed, snatched it gently, and held it up to the light like a scientist examining treasure. "Mom, we can try the blueberry mint idea now." "You're going to turn our kitchen into a flavor lab," Elise muttered, but her smile lingered. For a while, they worked side by side. Thomas helped Elise replace a broken table leg with one of his spare braces from the truck, and Maya used leftover chalk to draw hopscotch lines across the back corner of the market. Between customers, Elise wiped flour off her apron and leaned in closer to Thomas than she had the week before. Her eyes carried less caution now, more steady warmth. Still, even comfort has its shadows. Around noon, a man in a crisp blue polo and khakis approached the stand. He was clean-shaven, well-fed, and his sunglasses stayed on even in the cloudy light. He stopped short when he saw Elise, his face contorting into a surprised smirk. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Didn't expect to see you back in town, Elise." Thomas froze. Elise's face didn't change. Not much, but her hand reached for Maya's shoulder instinctively, steadying the girl behind her. "Hello, Jordan," she said flatly. The man looked at Maya, then back at Elise, then at Thomas, who stood still as stone. "This him?" Jordan asked, nodding toward Thomas. "Is he the new project?" Thomas narrowed his eyes. "Is there a reason you're here?" Jordan smiled like someone used to getting what he wanted. "Business trip. Figured I'd check out the local scene. Didn't know Elise was part of it." Maya tugged at her mother's apron. "Mom, can we go home now?" Elise didn't answer right away. Thomas stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Jordan and the two of them. "You've checked it out. Maybe now it's time to move on." Jordan scoffed, but the confidence cracked slightly. All right, man. No need to get territorial. Just making conversation. Thomas didn't flinch. Conversation doesn't usually come wrapped in disrespect. Jordan backed away with a theatrical shrug. Some folks don't change, he said, half to himself, half to Elise. Some just find better actors. He walked off. Elise exhaled sharply and turned back to her table, hands trembling just slightly. Thomas didn't say anything. Not yet. He bent down and helped Maya gather the muffins that had shifted during the tension. Later, after the market wound down, they sat together on a bench behind the vendor tents. Maya leaned against her mother's side, half asleep. Elise, Thomas said softly, do I need to ask who he was? No, she replied, but I'll tell you anyway. She stared out at the trees, her voice even. Jordan was Maya's father. He left when I was 3 months pregnant. Said he wasn't ready. Said I was too much. Then he said nothing at all for 6 years. Thomas clenched his jaw but said nothing. I don't want him near her. Not now. Not ever. You won't have to worry, Thomas said. Not as long as I'm around. Elise turned to him. Her expression didn't hold drama, only truth. Are you going to be around, Thomas? He paused. I haven't figured everything out yet, but I want to. I want to be where you are, where she is. Maya stirred, mumbling in her sleep. I like it when he's near. Neither of them moved for a long moment. Then Elise leaned her head against his shoulder, just slightly. I'm still scared, she whispered. I am too, he said. But maybe, she added, her voice trembling, we can learn to stop being scared, together. Thomas looked up at the graying sky. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the sun was still shining, and for the first time in a long while, he believed it might break through. The cold came in fast, that weekone of those sharp New England turns where autumn feels more like a whisper before winter comes knocking. Frost painted the edges of the pasture behind Thomas's farmhouse, and the porch, once newly stained and bright, was now dusted white in the early morning light. Elise hadn't returned his last text. It had been 3 days. That alone wasn't Strangish was busy. Maya could be a handful, and the bakery orders usually picked up ahead of Thanksgiving. But Thomas knew something was off. It was the silence that unsettled him most. Not angry silence, just absence. Elise was never one to vanish without a word, not even when her hands were full. So that morning, Thomas drove into town. The farmer's market was empty for the season, replaced by bare trees and shuttered stalls. He passed the old white church, turned onto Maple Hollow Road, and parked just down from their small duplex near the post office. He knocked on the door. No answer. Knocked again, harder. Still nothing. Then he heard it. A weak cough. Muffled footsteps. The door creaked open a few inches, and Maya's face peeked through, pale and worried. Mr. Thomas. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Hi there, kiddo. Is your mom home? Maya nodded, then hesitated. She's lying down. She said not to wake her, but she keeps waking up anyway. Thomas's eyes narrowed. Can I come in? She nodded and stepped aside. The house was warm but dim, with the soft hum of a space heater buzzing near the living room. The smell of bread hung faint in the air, but it was stale now like something half forgotten. Dishes were stacked in the sink. A tray of burnt scones sat on the stove. On the couch lay Elise, wrapped in 2 quilts, her face paler than he'd ever seen it. Her eyes fluttered open as he approached. You came, she murmured, trying to sit up. Stop, he said gently, kneeling beside her. Don't move. It's just the flu, she whispered. I've been through worse. Thomas rested the back of his hand against her forehead. It burned. You need to see a doctor. I can't afford to take off work, Thomas. Her voice cracked. We've got deliveries next week. Thanksgiving rush. And Maya is scared out of her mind, he cut in. And pretending not to be. Elise winced. Don't make this harder. Then stop making it easier for everyone but yourself, he snapped, sharper than he meant to. She looked away, and he softened. Sorry. I just don't do this alone, Elise. Not this. She was silent for a moment. Then she whispered, I haven't eaten since Tuesday. Just tea. Everything else comes back up. Thomas stood. Get dressed. We're going to the clinic. I can't leave Maya. She'll come with us. He turned to Maya, who was hugging her knees on the floor. Get your coat, sweetheart. We're going for a ride. At the clinic, Elise nearly fainted walking through the doors. The nurse gave Thomas a sharp look until Maya, in her quiet, steady voice, explained that her mama had been sick for a week and barely touched food. Blood tests, IVs, quiet crying behind thin curtains. Hours passed, and Maya fell asleep on Thomas's lap in the waiting room, her small hand still clutching a stuffed elephant. Finally, the doctor stepped out, middle-aged, weary-eyed, with the look of a man who'd had to deliver hard truths too many times. "She's not in immediate danger," he said, "but she's severely malnourished and dehydrated, and she's running herself into the ground." "That sounds like Elise," Thomas muttered. "She needs rest, real rest, and nutrition. A few more days of this and we'd be looking at heart complications. Maybe worse." Thomas nodded. "Thank you. You're not family?" "Not officially." The doctor hesitated, then said more softly, "Well, unofficially, she's lucky to have you. Most people wouldn't bring her in. They'd let her power through until she couldn't." That night, back at the farmhouse, Thomas made up the guest room. Elise lay in the bed, weak but fed. He'd managed to coax her into eating mashed potatoes and sipping broth. Maya curled up beside her for a while, but then wandered into the living room where Thomas was stacking firewood near the old stove. "She's better now?" Maya asked. "Getting there," he said. She nodded, then walked over and leaned against him. "I knew you'd come, even when she said not to bother you." "She said that?" "She says it when she's scared." Thomas crouched down and looked her in the eyes. "Are you scared?" Maya nodded slowly. "Not because of her. Because sometimes people leave when things get hard." He breathed in deeply. "I'm not leaving, Maya. Not because it's hard. Not for anything." Her lips quivered. "Even if she yells? Even if she tries to push you away? Even then." She threw her arms around his neck and whispered, "Okay." Later, when Elise stirred and opened her eyes, she found Thomas sitting in the armchair nearby, the fire casting flickering light across the walls. "You're still here," she murmured. He smiled. "Didn't say I was leaving." She blinked back tears, then asked, "Why?" "Because you need someone who stays." Her hand reached out from beneath the blanket. He took it. Her grip was weak, but steady. "You didn't have to do all this," she whispered. "No," he said, "but I wanted to." And in the quiet that followed, with Maya sleeping peacefully in the next room and the fire crackling softly, something between them finally stopped resisting. Something gave not in surrender, but in trust. The kind that's earned, not asked for. And Thomas knew, as surely as the wind pressed against the farmhouse walls, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Thanksgiving morning arrived cloaked in frost and silence, the kind of stillness that only rural towns seem to know. Sunlight crept in slow over the hills, warming the fields just enough to melt the ice off the fence posts, but not the air itself. Thomas was already up, standing at the stove, stirring a pot of sweet potatoes while the scent of rosemary and brown sugar clung to his sweatshirt. The farmhouse had never felt quite so full. Elise had insisted on helping, but he'd sent her back to the guest room with a firm stare and a mug of ginger tea. She wasn't strong enough yet, and she knew it, though she muttered under her breath about being babied while folding herself back into the couch with a blanket and a copy of Southern Living. Maya, on the other hand, was a blur of motion. She'd made name cards for the table using construction paper and crayons, carefully writing Mom, me, and Mr. Thomas in different shades of orange and red. The R in Mr. had a backward curve that made it look like a candy cane. Thomas peeked in from the kitchen. "That a turkey I see on your card?" Maya grinned. "He's wearing a hat, like you do." He touched the brim of his old farm cap. "I'm honored." She skipped back into the kitchen. "Can I mash the potatoes?" "You sure you can handle that kind of responsibility?" "I supervised a porch. I think I can handle tubers." Thomas laughed and handed her the masher. "Knock yourself out, boss." By noon, the table was set with mismatched plates, an old flannel runner, and 3 cloth napkins folded into crooked triangles. Elise, now dressed and sitting upright, watched it all with a kind of wonder in her eyes as though she wasn't sure this was real. "You didn't have to cook all this," she said quietly as Thomas set down the roasted turkey breast and cornbread stuffing. "I wanted to," he said simply. "And technically, Maya mashed half of it. She has a gift." Elise smiled, then looked around the table. This is the first real Thanksgiving meal we've had since Maya was born. Thomas blinked. Really? We usually just heated up something from the grocery store. Or she'd eat cereal and I'd fall asleep on the couch. It was easier that way. He didn't respond immediately. Then he said, "Easy isn't always what we need." They sat down, and Maya took both their hands. "We should say something." "Like a prayer?" Thomas asked. "Like a thank you," Maya said. "That's what Thanksgiving means." Elise nodded and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Go ahead, baby." Maya closed her eyes. "Thank you for food, for a warm house, for people who don't leave, and for Mr. Thomas, who showed up even when he didn't have to. Amen." Thomas didn't trust himself to speak for a long moment. He stared at his plate, the lump in his throat too big to swallow with gravy. After dinner, they moved to the couch with pecan and apple, both slightly overcooked but still delicious. The fire crackled in the wood stove. Maya was curled between them, already drowsy from food and warmth. Elise looked at Thomas, her voice soft. "You never talk about her." He turned his head. "Who?" "Your wife." He exhaled slowly. "Her name was Lillian. We met in Georgia. She was wild and kind and knew how to dance to music no one else could hear." Elise smiled gently. "How long were you married?" 7 years. Cancer took her before her 35th birthday. I stayed in Georgia for a while after, but the memories got too loud. So I came here. Quiet helped." "I'm sorry." He nodded. "I've never tried to fill that space. Thought I never would." Elise didn't reply right away. Then she said, "I think spaces like that aren't meant to be filled, just shared differently." He turned to her. "Is that what we're doing?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe. I just know it feels different now. Not easy, not perfect, but like something I don't want to lose." Thomas reached for her hand. "Then let's not." Maya stirred beside them, mumbled something about cookies and milk, and fell back asleep. Elise looked at her, then at him, a soft smile breaking through the tired lines on her face. "You've become part of her world faster than I ever thought anyone could." Thomas brushed a strand of hair from Maya's forehead. "She's got a way of making space for people, whether they're ready or not." They sat there a while longer, the silence between them no longer heavy, but warm. Thomas felt something ease in his chest, something that had been knotted up for far too long. The day ended not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with dishes in the sink, soft breathing on the couch, and a porch light glowing against the darkness outside. Later that night, when Elise had carried Maya to bed, and Thomas had stoked the fire one last time, he found a crayon drawing on the edge of the kitchen table. It showed 3 stick figures again, one tall with a hat, one with a curly ponytail, and one small with a giant smile. Above them, written in bright purple crayon, were the words, "This is our house now." He stared at it for a long while, and for the first time in years, Thomas Carter didn't feel like a man who'd lost something. He felt like a man who had finally come home. The winter settled in with finality. Snow lined the rooftops and made each sunrise quieter, softer. The world outside the farmhouse slowed, as if the season demanded stillness. But inside Thomas Carter's home, life felt warmer than it had in years. Elise and Maya spent more days there than not. Elise still baked, though, now in Thomas's kitchen, filling it with the smell of cinnamon, nutmeg, and something like belonging. Maya had claimed the small room under the eaves as her own, and decorated it with paper snowflakes, construction paper hearts, and a collection of smooth rocks she insisted were magic. On a Saturday morning, Thomas found himself at the table with Maya, helping her glue buttons onto a snowman made from cotton balls. Elise was in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied with a red ribbon, stirring batter with the same focus she once reserved for keeping everything from falling apart. "This one's you," Maya said, pointing to a snowman with a lopsided cowboy hat drawn in marker. "Because of the hat? Because he looks like he takes care of the other ones." Thomas smiled. But before he could answer, a sharp knock rattled the front door. He glanced toward the entryway, then at Elise, who had frozen mid-stir. Her knuckles whitened around the wooden spoon. Thomas stood. "You expecting anyone?" She shook her head slowly. "Number." He opened the door to find Jordan standing there. Again, same smug smile. Same 2 clean khakis, like winter couldn't touch him. Behind him stood a woman in a wool coat holding a clipboard. "Thomas Carter?" the woman asked. I'm from Family Services. We received a report that a minor is residing in an unlicensed home without appropriate guardianship. Thomas blinked. Excuse me? Elise had come to the doorway, her face pale. I told them, Jordan said casually, hands in his pockets, that she was letting a stranger play house with my daughter. Figured it was time someone responsible stepped in. She's not your daughter, Elise hissed. You left. You gave that up the day you disappeared. Legally, I'm still her father, he said coolly. And I have concerns. Thomas stepped in front of Elise, voice low but firm. You don't get to show up once every 6 years and decide you're a parent. The caseworker glanced between them, her expression neutral but watchful. Mr. Carter, I need to confirm who's currently residing in this home and in what capacity. Is Maya William living here full-time? She's here most days, yes, Thomas said, because her mother is recovering from illness and this home is safe. The woman looked to Elise. Miss William, are you unable to care for your child? No, Elise said, trembling. I'm not. I just needed help. And Thomas has been helping us both. The woman didn't nod, didn't frown. There will be a follow-up. We may need to speak with Maya directly. At her school. Please understand, this is standard procedure. Jordan gave a satisfied shrug, just doing what any concerned parent would. Thomas slammed the door before the man could say another word. The silence that followed was thick, bitter. Elise sank onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. He did this because I didn't let him back in, she whispered. Because I told him to leave us alone. Thomas sat beside her. He wants control. That's all this is. A performance. He could take her, she said, voice cracking. Even if it's just long enough to hurt her. No, Thomas said. We're not letting that happen. But what if the system listens to him? What if they think I'm unstable because of the hospital, or because we're staying here? What if they think she's better off with God? I can't even say it. Thomas leaned closer, placed a hand over hers. Then we show them what's real. That you're her mother, that Maya is thriving, that this place, this homie's not a risk, it's a refuge. That evening, Maya sensed something was wrong. She came and curled up between them on the couch, her head resting against Elise's arm. Is someone trying to take me away? She asked, her voice so small it barely reached Thomas's ears. Elise's face crumpled. No, baby. No one's taking you. We're just figuring out how to keep you safest. Maya looked up at Thomas. Are you leaving? No, he said instantly. Not now. Not ever. She didn't ask anything else. She just nodded and leaned into his side, like she knew that was enough. The next few days blurred. Elise met with a lawyer from the town over, scraping together money she didn't have. Thomas spoke to neighbors, friends, people who had seen how Maya blossomed since coming to the farmhouse. One of the women from the church, a retired teacher, offered to write a statement. I've seen that little girl giggle more in the last month than I ever did before, she said. That kind of joy isn't pretend. But the fear remained. On Wednesday night, Thomas came into the living room and found Elise standing by the window, staring out into the snow. They could still twist it, she murmured. Turn love into danger. It wouldn't be the first time a black mother had to fight for the right to raise her own child. Thomas stepped beside her. Then we fight. Together. She turned to him. Her eyes were tired, but not broken. You sure you want this? It's messy. Complicated. It won't go quietly. I never needed quiet, he said. I just needed the two of you. She stared at him for a long time, then whispered, Then don't ask me. Just stay. And he did. Not out of duty, not out of obligation, but because in that farmhouse, under that roof, he had found a battle worth standing for and a family worth protecting with everything he had. The courthouse in Rutland wasn't grand. It was small, square, and smelled faintly of varnish and paper. But to Elise, it might as well have been a fortress. The waiting room was too bright, the chairs too stiff. Maya sat beside her, knees swinging, her sketchbook balanced on her lap. She was drawing a tree, one with 3 trunks instead of 1, roots entwined like fingers. Thomas stood across from them, arms folded, trying not to pace. He wore his cleanest flannel shirt, pressed the night before, and boots scrubbed with more effort than he'd admit. On the other side of the room sat Jordan, his lawyer beside him, slick hair, black briefcase, and the confidence of someone who hadn't spent a day alone in years. "Don't look at him," Elise whispered to Maya. "I'm not," Maya said. "I'm drawing." Elise reached over, smoothing the girl's curls, hand trembling. "Good." Thomas sat down beside them and leaned in. "Our lawyer said she's going to focus on stability, what Maya knows, what she's thriving in. Don't panic." I'm not panicking," Elise whispered, though her white knuckles said otherwise. "I'm furious." Maya looked up. "Am I going to have to live with him?" Elise's throat clenched. She opened her mouth, but couldn't answer. "No," Thomas said, firm and low. "We're here to make sure that doesn't happen." The clerk appeared at the door. "William versus Rhodes, hearing room 2. Elise stood slowly, knees shaky. Thomas placed a hand on her lower back, steadying. Maya grabbed Elise's fingers with one hand and Thomas's with the other. The three walked in together. The courtroom wasn't large, just a judge's bench, 2 tables, rows of pew-like benches behind. Elise's lawyer, a woman named Becca Sims, greeted them with a calm nod. "You don't need to say much unless you're asked. Just be honest, and don't let him provoke you." They sat. Jordan's lawyer opened with his version of concern, that Maya was being housed by a non-relative, that Elise had suffered recent health issues, that the child had expressed confusion about her father figure. Elise tightened her jaw. Then Becca stood and told a different story. She spoke of Elise's work ethic, her devotion, her recovery. She mentioned Maya's school performance now better than ever. She listed witness statements, including a Sunday school teacher who said Maya had come out of her shell like a sunflower following the light. She brought up Thomas, not as a replacement, but a presence, a protector, a man who, in his own grief, had found purpose in kindness. "And finally, Your Honor," Becca said, "we ask that the court hear from Maya in a setting deemed appropriate, because her voice, though small, matters deeply." The judge, a middle-aged black woman with silver threads in her hair, nodded. "I've read the statements. I'd like to speak with Maya in my chambers. Both parents and guardians will remain here." Maya looked at her mother. Elise nodded. "It's okay, baby. Just talk to her like you talk to me." Maya stood, holding her sketchbook tightly. The bailiff led her out. The silence that followed was unbearable. Jordan tapped his fingers on the table. Thomas stared straight ahead. Elise closed her eyes and prayed, though she didn't know to who, or for what. Only that she wanted this to end with her daughter's heart intact. 15 minutes passed, then 20. When Maya returned, she looked calm, not brave, not scared, just certain. The judge returned 5 minutes later. Her face gave away nothing. She sat. "Having reviewed all evidence, and after speaking with the minor privately, I am prepared to make a temporary ruling with the intent to reassess in 6 months." Elise's stomach dropped. "Custody will remain with Miss Elise William," the judge continued, "with no visitation rights granted to Mr. Rhodes at this time. Should he wish to petition again, he must demonstrate consistent engagement, stability, and a willingness to support Maya's existing life without disruption." Elise exhaled, a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp. Thomas reached for her hand under the table. The judge wasn't finished. "And further, I commend this court to recognize the impact Mr. Thomas Carter has had on this child's emotional well-being. While not a legal guardian, his presence is notable. If Mr. Carter and Miss William intend to formalize their household, the court will take that into consideration in any future decisions." Jordan's lawyer leaned in, whispering something sharp. Jordan stood abruptly, but the judge held up a hand. "This court doesn't recognize temper tantrums from adults, Mr. Rhodes. I suggest you sit." He did, slowly, red-faced. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun to fall. The world was still gray, but somehow softer than before. Elise crouched and wrapped Maya in her arms, whispering something over and over. "You're safe, you're safe, you're safe." Thomas stepped back, giving them space, but Maya reached for him, tugging his coat sleeve. "What did you say to the judge?" Elise asked, once they stood together again. Maya looked up. "I showed her my drawing, the one with the tree that has 3 trunks." "And what did you tell her it meant?" Thomas asked. "That I don't live in a broken house," Maya said. "I live in a growing one. It's different, but it's real." That night, back at the farmhouse, Elise set the sketchbook on the mantel. Thomas lit a fire. Maya fell asleep, curled between them on the couch. No big speeches, no grand declarations. Just the soft breath of a child, the warmth of a shared blanket, and the sound of wood crackling in the quiet. A family not born, but chosen, protected, rooted, home. Spring arrived in slow, tender steps. The snow melted first from the hilltops, trickling down into creeks that had forgotten how to sing. Birds returned, clumsy and cheerful, pecking at Thomas's herb garden and scolding him when he stepped too close. Inside the farmhouse, life found its rhythm simple, imperfect, and deeply alive. Elise had taken over the kitchen by then, not because Thomas couldn't cook, he could, but because she loved it. The clatter of mixing bowls, the scent of warm vanilla, the way Maya tiptoed in each morning to sneak spoonfuls of batter, those had become her peace. Thomas, for his part, had stopped watching them from a distance. He no longer stood on the outside of the warmth. He had stepped into it, with muddy boots and calloused hands and a heart still mending in all the right places. One Sunday afternoon, the three of them were elbow-deep in biscuit dough. Maya was in charge of cutting shapes. She insisted on hearts, stars, and one oddly shaped biscuit she claimed looked like a goat. Elise rolled her eyes with affection. That's either a goat or a very confused moon. It's love, Maya said seriously. Love doesn't have to be symmetrical. Thomas smiled but said nothing. He wiped his hands on a towel, stepped out of the kitchen, and returned a few minutes later carrying a small wooden box. It had belonged to his grandmother, the one who taught him how to make dill pickles and how to endure heartbreak. He placed it gently on the counter beside Elise's flour-covered rolling pin. She glanced at it, then at him. What's this? Something I've been thinking about for a while. Maya looked up from her goat, heart biscuit. Is it candy? No, Thomas said, smiling, but it is sweet. Elise wiped her hands on her apron, then slowly opened the box. Inside sat a simple silver ring, delicate but strong, with a small amber stone set in the middle. Not flashy, not new, but worn with meaning. Elise didn't speak right away. Her fingers hovered above the ring like it might vanish if touched. Thomas, I know we've walked through storms, he said. I know it's been messy, but this house, this life, it feels like something we built together, and I'd like to keep building it. As your partner, as Maya's, not just friend, not just someone who shows up, but as someone who stays. Elise's lips parted, but still no words came. Thomas kept going, his voice steady. I'm not asking for a wedding next week. I'm asking for permission to stand beside you, to belong here, officially, to choose you every day, both of you. Maya stared wide-eyed, then whispered, "This is better than candy." Elise laughed softly, one hand covering her mouth, the other still resting on the edge of the wooden box. "You're serious," she said. "Dead serious," Thomas replied. "Though Maya told me the ring should come with a biscuit, so I'm hoping that buys me bonus points." Elise picked up the ring, held it to the light. The amber caught the sun like a drop of honey. "My answer," she whispered, "has always been yes. I was just too scared to say it out loud." Thomas stepped closer. "Still scared?" "Yes," she said, "but less than before." He reached for her hand, and she let him slide the ring onto her finger, the fit imperfect but perfect enough. Maya clapped her dough-covered hands and declared, "Now we have to make wedding cookies. It's a thing. I saw it on television." A week later, the wedding happened beneath the large maple tree in the field behind the farmhouse. There were no pews, no formal vows written in gold ink, just a few friends from town, neighbors who brought folding chairs and deviled eggs, and Ruthie from the market, who insisted on officiating despite having no credentials beyond a booming voice and a fierce sense of justice. Maya wore a white sundress with pink sneakers. Thomas wore his best shirt and a crooked tie that Elise tied for him 3 times before giving up. Elise didn't carry a bouquet, just a warm loaf of cinnamon bread she handed to Thomas at the altar and said, "This is how I say I love you." And Thomas, eyes full, answered simply, "Then I'll never go hungry again." When Ruthie asked if anyone had any objections, Maya stood up and said, "I object if there's no cake." The crowd laughed, and someone handed her a plate of carrot cake with cream cheese frosting. After the vows, Maya tugged on Thomas's sleeve. "Does this mean I can call you Dad now?" Thomas crouched down, his voice thick. "Only if you want to." She hugged him fiercely. I wanted to a long time ago. I just didn't want to rush you. That night, after the guests had gone, after the lanterns had burned low, Thomas, Elise, and Maya sat on the porch tired, full, and silent in the best way. The stars were out. The wind rustled the trees like an old lullaby. Maya leaned her head on Thomas's shoulder. Elise laced her fingers through his. "Remember the first time I came here?" she whispered. "I was terrified." "So was I," Thomas said. "But you still opened the door." Elise nodded. "And you never let it close again." Thomas looked at the two of them as wife, his daughter not by blood, but by every choice that mattered. He didn't need a grand house or a big life. He had a porch. He had laughter. He had love that didn't need to be asked for anymore. It had found its home, and so had he.